The following content is provided under a Creative Commons license. Your support will help MIT OpenCourseware continue to offer high-quality educational resources for free. To make a donation or view additional materials from hundreds of MIT courses, visit MIT OpenCourseware at ocw.mit.edu.
Hi guys, I'm Nancy Demerdash. I'm presenting today on what, as you can see from my title, Before the Scramble for Africa, Tracing African Architecture Through Trade circa 1200 Common Era. What immediately comes to mind when you think of Africa? Anybody? Shout out something. I won't penalize you. Something, anything at all. I don't.
Conflict diamonds.
Okay, diamonds, good one. New movie that just came out. Anybody else?
Black people.
Black people. Okay, even better. That's true. Okay, well, it's already a given that Africa is represented in the news and media. But the images that we have of Africa rarely go beyond the ubiquitous and often, very pejorative misconceptions and cliches of the continent. We're presented with a place that's always in the midst of disintegration and chaos, so we tend to approach Africa with a sense of pity. Now, in reality, there's much more going on, and that at the public level, we're not always attuned to. These are conventions that have become, a sort of cultural and social pathology in the West. And at this pathology, at the heart of it, is what curator Okwe Nwezer calls Afro-pessimism, as you'll probably read in your readings for this week in the exhibition book, Snap Judgments. So, the great thing about the study of African of art and architecture is that it finds ways to upset these pervasive Afro-pessimistic conventions of imaging, and that we're both very attracted to and dangerously immune to at the same time. Instead, what we want to do is raise vital questions on and to propose new possibilities for the meaning of how we understand African culture and architecture before European colonization, well before 1200, which is the scramble for Africa, which I'm talking about. Now, just to reiterate, the BBC in 2006 issued this article asking, is Africa's architecture dying? Obviously just the language right there. I mean, the fact that, the death and, and disintegration is, entirely evident. We have, let's just read some of these comments. This is an interview that was conducted. We have Joshua. The architecture that is indigenous to Africa is too primitive. Africa has to move with recent advances in building construction. The need of the people in Africa has changed over the time. Therefore, buildings should be designed and built in a way that these needs are met. Okay, that's fair enough. But, is it primitive? Is it on the decline? These are people living there, presumably, who espouse these opinions, and going on, you have somebody like Victor Chambers, Sierra Leone, someone from Sierra Leone who lives in Ghana. He says, is it only in Nigeria, Kenya, and Uganda buildings have been collapsing? Even in Europe and the United States, where perhaps they have better building structures, well-built buildings have been collapsing. Anyways, while we give way to modern impressive architecture, we must not neglect our heritage in style and meaning. Well, but that's all well and good too. So, the language perpetuates this notion that architecture is dying, and that there's no hope, that it's a lost cause, which is really something that today I hope that we can combat and really grapple with. So in this class, we're going to leave behind the political map that you guys, I'm sure, have all seen, dozens of times in your upbringing and schooling. And in order to do that, we're going to travel back, and as I said, focusing on the year 1200, and try to understand the historical development of various architectural forms as a function of natural resources and the complex changing societies and trading economies that depended on these resources. In tandem with this, we're going to see how different architectural typologies evolved and were influenced by environmental and climatic changes. Okay, so first let's take a look. Now, as a disclaimer, and this came up over the course of the term, I've been grappling with a lot of these maps, and for their lacks, for their absences, for a whole slew of problems that they present. So, a lot of the maps that I show here will not always be perfect, but I will, try my best to illustrate their flaws. Now, in the maps presented here, we have on the image on the right, we have 4 vegetation zones. Okay, so we have the Sahara, which is this orange region, which is primarily desert. You only find mostly camels, maybe a couple of goats here and there. And here you have this Sahelian semi-desert, which is not quite a savanna, but has patches of grass and so on growing intermittently, and you'll find a lot more like goats and pastoralism. Basically, as you proceed south, you'll find the greater incidence of pastoralism. And then you have this savanna region and the rainforest along the coastline. So some of these resources, like salt, which actually was extracted from the Sahara, and gold, which is mined in present-day Ghana, Mali, Cote d'Ivoire, Guinea, Burkina Faso, Togo, and Benin. Basically this whole chunk of land is just entirely chock full of gold. And also you'll find iron, which on the image on the left, you'll find these black lines are showing the spread of ironworking throughout the continent. Now, and that's something I'll get back to later on as the lecture progresses. But basically what I want you to see is how these resources also, hold on before I close, there's cattle, domestication of cattle along this line right here, and also from what is now Tunisia spreading southward. But what I want you to see is that these goods really shape the flow throughout the continent of trade. Okay, so this again shows the major trade routes. In the yellow triangles like here, and some of the white ones as well, show where salt was extracted, and also you have this orange copper source, which is located right here. This map is also problematic because it shows, yes, it shows some east-west connectivity, but equally there was an important north-south axis of dynamic connection as well. It ignores blatantly the foundries that you'd find in Axum, metal foundries, and as I mentioned, this is one of the take-home lessons for today, that maps are constructs in the same way that history is a construct, and we have to be critical of them. Okay, so Moving on to slide 5, we have this is just an introduction to some of the great empires that arose as a result of these, complex trading networks. But, because I'm focusing mainly on the period of like 1200, we're only going to be discussing the Ghana and Mali empires. The image on the left, I adapted sort of. Initially, the Iberian Peninsula and Saudi Arabia was not shaded purple, which is supposed to be the region where Islam spread. But yeah, I appropriated it a bit. And, once again, there is this north-south axis, which isn't really being represented. And, perhaps this map better accounts for the spread of like ironworking and cattle and so on that really was within that shift, or yeah. Okay. Okay, so, prosperity generated through trade led to the growth of urbanization and certain settlements. Cities along these trading routes, which, you'll see central nodes here and there, really were crucibles of ideas and values and practices, that were spread. And it's pretty remarkable, as I hope you'll see. So where are we going today? Okay, we're going to start out in Morocco, southern Morocco, a fortress called the Kasbah Ayit Ben Hadou. We're then going to go down to the Great Mosque of Jenny in Mali, and then go up slightly northeast to the Mopti region in Mali to see the Dogon communities. We're then going to sweep across this east-west axis of trade, and we're going to go to Lalibela. And following trade routes south along the Swahili coast, we're going to stop in Hasuni Kubwa, and then we're going to end in Great Zimbabwe. All right. So let's begin at our site at Ayit Ben Hadou in southern Morocco. It's located right here outside of Ouarzazate, which I think may or may not be on your sheet. But before we do that, let's get sort of a sense of historical backdrop. It's the middle of the 8th century, and the Arab conquests under the Umayyad dynasties based in Damascus are penetrating full force into the Maghreb, which is the westernmost region where Islam spread. It's actually the Arabic word for west. And so, you see right here, there's this east to west line of movement going on, and I also want to stress one thing. Typically we always think of people from the Maghreb as Berbers, but just to dispel this misconception, the term Berber is actually derived from the Greek term barbaros, which means barbarian. And this, really we want to call these people what they call themselves, which is Imazigen, which means free men in their own language. And, the Imazigen people put up a good fight against Islam and the incoming Muslims in the 8th century. But the advantages of fully submitting to the religion far outweighed the disadvantages posed by rebellion. So by 1100, the Maghrebi kingdoms began to mobilize their power, and it's under the Almoravids, or as they're called in Arabic, the Almorabitun, right up here from 1050 to 1140, that they really seized power over all of Algeria, Morocco, Tunisia, and the Iberian Peninsula as well. But protecting this territory wasn't an easy task for the Almoravids, and they had to build strongholds to sustain their hegemony. Ayat Ben Hadou is an example of this type of defensive architecture, and it is essentially a Casbah, which I'm sure you've all heard from the Clash's popular song. It means it's the Arabic word for fortress, and these people clearly did not want their Casbah rocked. So, so to do that, to keep it from being rocked, they built high mud and stone walls, demonstrated here. Actually, this is, and you'll see these crenellations, which are these tiny slits, or actually, they're not tiny. I mean, they're slit windows that were used, to shoot arrows and other weapons. It's a defense mechanism, and also, keeping sunlight out, keeping the cool cool air within the structures themselves. And the roof terraces are often laid with beams of the trunks of palm trees, also to sort of insulate to some extent. Today, its inhabitants moved from the former qasr. This word qasr in Arabic is castle, so this former fortress, to the new area across this wadi, which is basically a river valley. I mean, as you saw in the previous picture right here, there is sort of this slight river. And it's, now a blessed UNESCO World Heritage Site. So why is this so important? Okay, basically, in this region of Morocco, you have this Ouarzazate region, you have more than 300 out of the 1,000 or so Casbahs that have been identified in the whole country. Now that is a huge concentration of Casbahs in one region, and it's no accident that they're all in that region, because there's this huge monopolization on the trade routes, and Ayat Ben Hadou is actually on a route. It has a strategic location on the route to Marrakesh and some of the imperial cities. Okay, so where are we going next? Well, right now we're going to the Great Mosque in Jenny, in Mali. And we're going to follow basically not these two lines specifically, but lines that of trade that connected the two regions. Okay. Okay, so the rise in exports of West African gold, ivory, salt, and slaves were major factors in the rise of the grassland kingdoms. But what's unique about Jenny is that as a city, it was never subsumed into any kingdom and remained independent, even though it did benefit from the stability of the Ghana Empire and the gold that it thrived upon. In fact, most of the first large-scale states with capitals located near the desert fringe also predate Muslim trading contacts. And in Jenny specifically, there have been Hellenistic beads that have been excavated at the site, which date back to 250 before the Common Era. By 700 of the Common Era, a solid trading network was established and taking shape in West Africa, as you'll see in this map in slide 11. We have, these S's, which indicate salt, G's, which indicate gold, and they're all over the place. And this circle right here is the former Ghana empire, and right here is Jenny, just outside of it. Okay. And even though, one thing to keep in mind, even though Mali, about 90% of the population now practices Islam, you have to remember that back in the year 1200 or so, it was still a site of religious contestation, and there, native religious practices were still sort of practiced in secret, or tried to mainly keep it hidden from the Muslim population. Okay, so let's look at the Great Mosque of Jenny. Although the original structure of the mosque dates back to the 13th century, this is a typo, it should say 13th. When it was founded by a local Jenny chief named Kunboro. By the early 19th century, it was largely demolished and then reconstructed in similar form, trying to be true to its original form under the French colonial direction in 1907. So right here you see this is the Qibla wall, which faces Mecca, and the Souk, which I haven't read anything specifically, but my assumption would be that there is probably some sort of waqf or institution, or like a charitable endowment that instituted the presence of the marketplace. I don't know if it was already there before the construction of the mosque. Anyways, so let's check out this YouTube clip.
Video removed due to copyright restrictions.
That's it. That's that. So to return, we have a plan of the mosque, which features, this transverse nave. You have the women's gallery in the back, hypo-style hallway, or hall, courtyard, rather, and the entrances of the mosque are on the north and south ends. As I mentioned, the palm structures, they really were, helped. They still help the local masons with the perform the reapplication of mud and so on. What's really phenomenal about the mosque in general is that during the day the mud soaks up all of this heat from the sun, and yet the mosque stays cool during the day, and at night, because it has absorbed all of this heat, it then provides warmth in the interior of the mosque. I don't have an image here, but there are actually ceramic pipes that were built to lead the drainage away from the mosque and the building itself, to prevent further deterioration. So that's that. Okay, so where are we going next? We're going to the Dogon communities, also in Mali, in the Mopti region, and we're following, more or less the same trade route. So these, at first glance, they seem chaotic, right? I mean, you have this aerial view that's from a high distance above ground. It looks like a mess, but it isn't. In the 12th century, these communities started on the edges of this sandstone escarpment, which you'll see right here, hidden sort of in this cliff. And it's believed that, it was started by descendants of an early Iron Age community. Their villages are highly organized according to a cosmological system, which is at the core of the Dogon people's belief system. Right here, you see a plan of basically what the people living in this region think is, that they structure their homes according to this idea of a world egg, that the world as we know it is disseminated from a seedling, from this idea of reproduction and fertility, and you see, interestingly, you see the outline of a man in a fetal position, which of course reinforces this idea that the home, that domestic space, is a womb. It is a site of birth, a site of generation, or a generative in its capacity. And right here you have these, this is just an example of some of the artwork created by the Dogon people in carved figures carved out of wood, having apotropic value, talismanic value. And in the image on the left, you see these granaries, which are thought to have both, this conical phallic shape and a hollow, vaginal shape, which of course reinforces the whole reproduction, fertility trope. The houses and the granaries are built out of a combination of mud and stone, and with the addition of, the yes, decorative, right, doors. So we're going to cut across to Lalibela, located in what is now Ethiopia. Christianity was first established in Nubia in the 4th century, and it had a powerful religious presence, of course, way beyond colonial influence and proselytization. Under the Zagwe dynasty in the 12th century, central authority in the north was established, and the capital shifted from Aksum to Lalibela. So Aksum is right here, to Lalibela just south of it, in the Lasta mountain range. So here the maintenance of a religious economy was vital to the actual economy, and it composed of the king, priests, and farmers. Now, this image right here, taken from Professor Jarzambek's article, is actually of the Church of Yamrahana Christos, not of Lalibela, but I included it for the sake of conveying this idea that both structures used this very intricate system of hydroengineering, collecting water from the base of the church, from this basin structure, and also, it should be noted that King Lalibela controlled the water supply and marketed it as such, as holy water, to entice pilgrims, which in turn help the economy. The water basin at the base of this Church of St. George leads to its own spring. And the man who is supposedly built this complex system, hydroengineering system, is named Abba Libanos. It's contested whether he was from Lebanon or not, but he was responsible for this building of artesian wells to distribute water. Okay, so next we're going to move to Husuni Kubwa in Tanzania, current modern-day Tanzania. And we need to situate ourselves historically a bit. The language, Swahili, is really a creolized language, on the Swahili, on the East African coast, but it is Bantu in its structure. And if you remember from a map I showed earlier, maybe you don't, but the Bantu peoples really spread east and on to the west. So, I mean, it just shows that because Swahili as a language is mainly has Bantu grammar and structure, that, even though there was, Arab influence, Arabic words, Hindi words, Portuguese words imported into the language, its structure at its core was from another region of Africa altogether. So what was the impetus for this coastal trade? Well, the Mongol invasions of the 13th century had huge repercussions on world history. And even when Genghis Khan died in 1227, his empire was still growing. Masses of people in Iran and Central Asia were wiped out. And in 1258, Baghdad was entirely sacked, which led to decline of the Abbasid Empire or Caliphate. And everywhere the Mongols went, they plundered their subjects, turned them into serfs, and taxed them ruinously. But that said, they had complete control over this whole vast expanse of land. The different shadings indicate Genghis Khan's successors, his 4 sons, who mainly, divided up this region for administrative purposes and also purposes of rivalry. But the Mongols actually, contributed greatly to the established trading networks and through their jam system, which was a postal system, which is pretty much, for its day, it was equivalent to our modern day FedEx. I mean, it was pretty remarkable with the speed that they were able to get things to and from places. So basically, excuse this map, I know it's a little busy, but basically, because of the effect of Mongol conquests, everything shifted downward. Not everything, but there was this shift downward. And Shiben will talk about that somewhat in his talk, focusing in on the area of the Indian Ocean. But to return to our point, and also monsoon cycles also regulated maritime trade too, had to be in tune with the weather. Okay, these are just more trade routes. All right, so now we turn to Husuni Kubwa, which was a palace. It literally means large fort, and it was built at the entrance to the harbor of Kilwa. It was constructed on a high sandstone headland, and it was actually built entirely out of coral, which is amazing if you consider, that all of this coral from the reef just outside of off the mainland built this, entirely intricate structure. Here is a digital reconstruction of what is now, unfortunately in ruins, but just to give you a sense of what the building composed, here is a reconstructed floor plan. We have a stairwell, which is located right here, that basically also, I think, is right here, or actually, wait, no, right here, excuse me, stairwell that would lead into what were storage rooms all around this quadrangle. And as goods were being received, they were recorded and taxed, and this fort provided great surveillance over what was incoming and outgoing. And also, you have this sector is sort of the Sultan's private headquarters. You have an audience hall, which is thought to have been the place where the Sultan received his courtiers, and you also have a swimming pool. That's not a dome; it's a swimming pool. Interestingly enough, and these are all like private rooms for wives and children and so on. And actually, the Diwan, which was featured, yeah, the Diwan actually was right here where he received his courtiers. A Chinese Yuan dynasty flask was found on the floor of the private quarters dating to about 1300. So, you know, there is archaeological evidence that states that this was a site of international trade. So now we want to move to our last site, which is Great Zimbabwe, and let's take a look at it. All right, but before we do that, I just want to reinforce again that ironworking and iron smelting really spread with the Bantu dispersal, and which led to you know, where we're concentrating on Great Zimbabwe right here. So, okay, so what is Great Zimbabwe? Okay, there's a picture of an auroch bull. I'll get to that in a little bit. The Monomotapa Empire built an elliptical granite stone wall with a tall monument in the valley, which is sort of right here, this conical structure, which is not, its purpose is not really known to scholars. It could be a granary, it could have been a treasury, it could have been a whole slew of things, but nobody's really quite certain as to what it was. These walls were key elements to the governments that formed in the region between the 11th and 15th centuries. Its walls, believe it or not, are 10 meters high and an average of 3 meters thick. And, you know, I mean, this calls into question, you know, to what extent was this intended for defense? Some scholars have postulated that that because the domestication of cattle spread southward, you know, they needed structures to enclose the cattle. But having walls 3 meters thick, I mean, it really doesn't explain much in terms of keeping cattle. They're not going to bust through, you know, 3 meters of wall. But anyways, you see, you know, really, hold on. You see really a lot of Chinese porcelain that's been excavated, like in Husuni Kubwa, and these luxuries, of course, you know, point to the existence of a social elite, which, you know, points to these really complex society. But eventually the site was abandoned, and scholars, you know, think that this is probably due to either drought or disease. But unfortunately, when the site was excavated or colonized rather by Cecil Rhodes, you know, this area was once called Rhodesia, much of the artifacts were pillaged. So that's what you get for colonization. But I hope today I've demonstrated that, African architecture is neither uniform nor simplistic, nor dying, as the BBC might have us believe. Rather, it's diverse and rich, and its societies reflect neither the chaos nor disintegration that misconceptions perpetuate. And to appropriate Okwe and Wazor's term that I mentioned at the beginning, it's through this lens of Afro-optimism, rather, that we might look at Africa and its architecture and global interactions with a more positive outlook. Thank you.